All right, well, I see that the participant number has stopped growing, so I want to welcome all of you to the Kelley Research Week faculty panels. My name is Jamie Prenkert, and I'm the Executive Associate Dean for Faculty and Research here at the Kelley School. In a moment, I'm going to introduce the faculty that will talk to you about their research and answer your questions about what it is to have an academic career. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about why research is so important in business schools like the Kelley School. Our tenure track faculty conduct research in addition to their teaching and service responsibilities that they have. Most research in a business school follows the scientific method for empirical research. In other words, forming a hypothesis, gathering and generating data to test the hypothesis, using statistical, econometric methods to analyze data and interpret and support for the hypothesis. Other research develops analytical models that look for optimal solutions, design frameworks for understanding business phenomenon, or use logic or past precedents to draw conclusions about new situations. The theory and frameworks on which this research is based are typically coming from basic disciplines like economics, law, psychology, sociology, or decision theory. And typically faculty in a business school like ours apply those theories to a business context or to questions that are important to businesses or business people. The research that they do is often inspired by complex real-world business problems that firms and managers and entrepreneurs and organizations are facing in our world. For example, in psychology, a psychologist may examine how using certain formats of presenting information, charts versus diagrams, or words, for example, vivid kinds of language, to present information might affect how people make decisions when they're given that information. Business research might take that kind of research approach and examine it in a business context. For example, they might look at annual reports from publicly traded companies or a press release sent to shareholders, taking into account the unique institutional features of that setting or the unique features of the people who receive that information to see what impacts it has on firm performance or the like. Our faculty publish research in academic journals of a variety of kinds and focuses, and also outlets where business practitioners, those who are actually doing the work of the business, managers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, seek information as well. So that begs the question, though, why is this research important to the Kelley School, and how does it provide us value? Well, for one thing, it generates new knowledge and frameworks about business, and that knowledge is generalizable to other businesses and economic situations, and it helps us understand and analyze those new situations. For example, much of what we know now about valuing stocks and options arose from academic research. It also helps managers and policymakers address real difficult, thorny issues that they face in real time. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic and over the course of the early pandemic, IU Health was really needing to figure out how they could optimally staff nurses to face the onslaught of patients that they were going to see in their facilities. And a team of researchers from our operations and decision technologies department helped them develop models for that optimal staffing of nurses that really made a difference in Indiana in how the pandemic was addressed by the hospitals in the IU Health system. Students also benefit from having faculty who produce and understand cutting edge research. It's knowledge that isn't just in textbooks. It provides frameworks for analyzing new and important business issues. And it also develops a kind of general critical thinking approach that is vital that faculty learn from doing research, model, and pass on to students. In more practical and, but nonetheless, perhaps just as important consideration, schools are ranked in part on their research productivity. For example, the Kelley School of Business is ranked number 8 in the world by the Financial Times for the research aspect of what we do. There's a lot of research that goes on in the Kelley School. Here are just some examples of statistics from the last 5 years that give you some idea of that. In the Kelley School, 162 different faculty members have published over 577 articles in top journals in their fields. 56 faculty members have served in 85 positions on editorial boards at leading journals. 65 faculty members have won more than 120 competitive research awards. And as I said, the Kelley School of Business has that tremendous ranking of number 8 in the Financial Times for research. So research is important, not only for what we learn, but also the reputation and the prospects of the Kelley School, and for business people in the real issues that they face every day. We're fortunate to have 3 members of our faculty here today to share their research with you. And I'm going to throw it over to them to do that introduction in just a moment. I do want to remind you that you can join another research panel tomorrow from at 6 o'clock when faculty from accounting and marketing and operations in our operations and decision technologies department will be doing their presentations. And I also want to remind you of the Friday session where the honor students will present their research. So this research week is a really fantastic opportunity to provide that information, these opportunities to you. In addition, I want to let you know that at any point during the presentations, when the faculty are talking about their research, or when we're engaging in a little bit of a question and answer, when they've all had that time, you can write your own questions into the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll make sure that your questions get asked to the faculty members, and you can ask them either specifically to an individual faculty member or to the panel as a whole, and we'll make sure your questions get answered. I want to take also a moment to thank Bree Josephy, a clinical associate professor in accounting, for being the inspiration for this Kelley Research Week. She's put in a tremendous amount of time. She envisioned this, did the work to see it through. And also want to thank Ben Taylor and Chloe Storm in the undergraduate program for helping with all of the arrangements for this. Having said that, I now would like to turn it over first to our panelists, first to Christiano Guarana, who's an assistant professor in management and entrepreneurship. He's going to tell us a little bit about what his research is like.
Okay, thank you, Jamie, for the quick introduction. I'm super excited to be here, and definitely it's my pleasure to share a little bit about my research with you. I'm an assistant professor at Kelley. I've been here for about 5 years, and I do research mainly, I don't know, do we have slides, Ben? Yeah, so I do research on Superman. Actually, I'm kidding. Okay, my research focuses on leadership. And the reason that I make this association is just because most of us, at least up to a few years back, thought that leaders had superhero characteristics. They were born as leaders. They have these special powers that captivate people. And it's a little bit more complex than that, right? So research has shown that about 30% of leadership behaviors are related to traits or things that we inherit from our parents. But 70% is actually influenced by contextual factors, can be developed. And in particular, what I do look in leadership are things that are actually counter the stereotypical leader. And we can move the slide one more, please. I tended to look at sleep. Think about sleep. Sleep is generally perceived as being lazy, right? So no, actually sleep is a very good thing for leaders. And in one of my recent papers, what we did, we manipulated, we changed the sleep of some participants. And this is what we called an experiment. This is as close as the true science that we can get. So half of the participants in this study, we asked them to wake up through the night, okay, every hour, and fill out a survey, a bogus survey. And early in the morning, around 9 a.m., they were invited to go to a lab and deliver an inspirational speech. The other half of the participants, they actually didn't have any interruption in their sleep. So they slept very well. And then we measured, after they delivered this charismatic speech, we asked other people to rate how charismatic those speeches were. And sure thing, those who were sleep deprived, they actually had lower levels of inspirational leadership or charismatic leadership. And the main reason behind that was that these sleep deprived leaders were less able to control their negative emotions. So we could catch those negative signs through the speech. Interestingly enough, when followers are sleep deprived, they also rate the same leader as less charismatic than followers who had a very good night of sleep. So that's an experiment, okay? We manipulate the sleep, but there are other things that we can do. For example, in another project that I worked at, I tried to find the relationship between sleep and the development of the relationship between leaders and followers. We asked leaders and followers to fill out surveys. Yes, surveys are a huge part of what we do, okay? But we asked these followers and leaders that started new relationships to fill out surveys over 5 weeks. And we do find that when the leader slept poorly, that influenced how the followers perceived the quality of their relationship. And the opposite is also true. When the followers slept poorly, the leaders rated the followers or the relationship that they had with the followers as being bad. Perhaps even more interesting, the sleep deprived individual, leader or follower, still thought that the relationship that they had was okay, but the other party, not at all. This sucks. In a different paper, now that we know that sleep is really an important antecedent, that's the language that we use, it's an important thing that influences leadership, we started looking into interventions. And we looked into those blue light blocking glasses and the impact of that on work outcomes. Sure thing, we did find that when participants wore those blue light blocking glasses for 2 hours before going to bed, they not only slept better, but they also had higher levels of job performance, helping behavior, lower levels of being a jerk, right? So the counterproductive behaviors, and they were more engaged in their work as well. So it's important for us to understand that these factors, especially sleep and well-being, what are the roles that they play in leadership processes? Another part of my research is on these cognitive tensions that leaders can have. Okay, so sometimes being a leader is conflicting. Okay, so should I approve this initiative? Should I be against this initiative? And that creates a tension in their minds. I just got a paper I published that we show that when leaders experience ambivalence, okay, and again, think about ambivalence, it's probably the opposite of what you think a leader should experience. A leader should be assertive, okay? A leader should be decisive, but that's not actually the truth. We find that when leaders experience this tension, they suspend judgment, they take a step back. And now they can ask followers for more information. that creates a norm in which followers can also ask for help. And they talk to one another, trying to uncover as much information as possible about that particular project. And this process leads to better team performance. So yes, understanding tensions, understanding how sleep influences leadership, we are taking issues that once were thought to be counter to being a good leader and actually proving that those issues can actually be good for leadership. So sleep well, and if you are in doubt, don't jump to conclusions. Think carefully about that. And what is also interesting to see is now that your research can have a meaningful impact on society in organizations. And if we could move the slide, yes. In a different project, what we did was, do you know that Sleepy Monday, the Monday just after that we changed the time? Okay, we compared the sentences that judges had on that particular Monday. Okay, and on that particular Monday, we in general, we sleep 40 minutes less than the normal night. Okay, so we compared those sentences to other Mondays, and we found that the sentences on that particular Monday, they were more harsh. Okay, they were longer than the sentences on the other Mondays of the year. And in this case, we used what is called a natural quasi-experiment. Again, terminology that you will learn in the PhD program if you decided to pursue that. But then again, you'll have the opportunity to impact how businesses are conducted, the behaviors that leaders engage in my particular domain. Okay, and if you think about Google, for example, now they have sleep bots, okay, and other managers, and in different countries now you are not allowed to email people after, let's say, 7 p.m. Okay, so in order to protect the time of sleep time of their workforce, okay, we can, as individuals, stop replying or sending emails after 7 p.m. Or countries are actually adopting policies that it's not possible now to send emails after 7 p.m. So there are many different ways to impact our society, our businesses, and that's really our ultimate goal. We are contributing to theory for sure. We're trying to understand more and more and more. But as a business school, we are also trying to impact how businesses are conducted, the practical implications of our research. Okay. Well, with that said, I think we are moving to Abbey. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christiano. That's very interesting. I really appreciate your insights on your research. And next, I want to give the opportunity to Abbey Stemler, an associate professor in the Department of Business Law and Ethics, to talk about her research. Abbey, please take it away.
Thank you. Professor Guarana has some beautiful pictures, and I realize that mine are not nearly as fun. So apologies, but I am so grateful for you all attending this session. I'm a first-generation college student, so the idea of becoming a professor, going into academia at all when I was your age was kind of outside the realm of comprehension. So I think it's wonderful that you are making an effort to expose yourself to some of these other careers that you might not have otherwise thought of. So in order to kind of reflect and tell you a bit about my research, it kind of starts with what I was thinking about before I even decided to pursue scholarship. And that was after I graduated from law school and not liking the practice of law, I started a boutique hotel in downtown Bloomington. One, to get away from the law firm, and two, because it seemed like a really great market opportunity in the sense that 15 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of places to stay on big weekends like graduation and football. So using my law degree and my MBA I earned from Kelley, started a business. And what was really interesting is that when we built the hotel, essentially, there were a lot of regulations and rules we had to comply with that were, mind-blowing in terms of their complexity, their cost, kind of in some ways their arbitrariness. And about the same time that the hotel was being built and, going over budget by, orders of magnitude, was the idea that Airbnb was setting up in Bloomington, and friends down the street were able to list their spare bedrooms, their, lake houses, whatever, on the site without having to comply with all the rules and regulations I and my partner had to comply with in order to operate as a legal hotel. For example, we had to take about 30% of our layout and just give it away to safety exits to make sure that there were a sufficient amount for people when they were to stay. In addition, we had to have a sprinkler system installed. Even though we had very few rooms, we had to install horns and strobes. Things add up quickly when you think about all of the safety equipment installed into a public space. So when I felt that kind of frustration, when I could see how my profit margins were going to go, through the toilet, when my friends were able to list their spaces without any additional compliance costs, it's like, that's really interesting. And like I said, at the time, this was 15 years ago, there weren't a lot of rules set about how Airbnb needed to be regulated. So putting my lawyer hat on and my entrepreneurship hat on, I'm like, okay, well, that's something that should be studied. That's something that, is going to eventually cause a lot of problems, because if more and more people engage in Airbnb, which I thought was a great idea, even though many thought, who would allow some stranger to stay in your spare bedroom? As a millennial, I was like, okay, this is cool. I can see myself using this service. And so kind of just riding the wave, I was able to be one of the first people to write a paper on it. And then from there, I was able to kind of grow this body of scholarship related to the regulation of Airbnb, eventually Uber, eventually the entire sharing economy. And it's been fun. So one of the big things that have come out of my scholarship is, the matter of fairness, and also the matter of making sure that local regulators have the knowledge and the tools to effectively go up against these technology platforms to make sure that they keep the community safe, that their tax revenue, that taxes are properly paid. All of those things that a hotel would have to do, we needed to help regulators figure out how to do the same things on kind of like a ad hoc micro scale, because these Airbnbs were like tiny hotels everywhere. So through my research with organizations like the World Bank and with local governments, state governments, I was able to help identify some best practices that we could share broadly. And so my scholarship was like useful there, but then it also stemmed off after a time to focus on some of the other issues that were coming up with these platforms. And in particular, I was really fascinated by Uber and its initial lack of ethics, we might say, particularly with regard to observing user behavior. At one dinner party, Travis Kalanick, the former CEO of Uber, showed the dinner party participants where all the celebrities in town in New York were, because he had access to the God view of Uber. And that was startling to people, right? That all of this data can be collected and shared with abandon. So it was one, the privacy aspect there in Uber's behavior. And then two, Uber also engaged in some nefarious practices where they actually could identify who were regulators, who were lawmakers or part of law enforcement that were trying to regulate Uber, and make sure that they didn't get rides. So they could go so far as to understand who the person requesting the ride is based on credit cards or addresses, and then intentionally try to manipulate them into not understanding how Uber worked or not thinking it works as well as it does. So perhaps they don't need to regulate it, because if they can't get a ride, who would? So from that, the manipulation piece led me to some other questions about how else are technology platforms manipulating users. So that thread of research took me into the world of, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and how they create platforms and mediate our behavior through the platforms in ways that take away our choice, take away our decision making. And so I've written a series of paper on kind of the dark patterns, so to speak, the ways we're nudged by platforms. And from that, we get the exposure of these bad actions by platforms and the potential for other bad actions based on all the data and power they have, which led me to think about, again, regulation. And one of the big barriers to regulation of tech platforms is this 1996 law called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. It's just 26 words in this section, Section 230, that basically provides immunity for big tech based on anything a user does on the platform. So this would mean that if a Facebook user encouraged somebody to hurt somebody else, or just go so simple as a Facebook user encouraged somebody to spread a rumor or defame somebody in the sense that they're spreading something that hurts the reputation of another. Facebook itself, while it may profit from that engagement based on advertising dollars and that sort of thing, Facebook itself is not going to be responsible because of this federal old statute, old in the relative sense in terms of the life of tech law. These 26 words protected Facebook, Instagram, Uber, Airbnb from user behavior. So I wrote quite a bit to describe why that's a problem, why this broad immunity based on these 26 words is not what, one, the lawmakers actually intended at the time, because in 96, we were still dialing up with our phone lines. You weren't even born. So this law was outdated. We need to update it. So that was like 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And then if you've turned on, C-SPAN or some other a newspaper article about what Congress is talking about right now in terms of big tech, and it's the same thing that I was looking at 4 years ago in terms of we need to revise this particular law that gives tech platforms too much leeway in terms of their behavior. And then, looking at other regulatory problems in tech platforms like the consolidation of power among the big firms. So Facebook, as you probably know, owns Instagram, Google owns YouTube. You have these mergers that create even more powerful platforms, which once again leads to additional problems. And therefore we need to figure out which laws fit and which laws need to be changed. And so my current, past 2 years has been focused on the application of antitrust law to big tech, which is another really exciting thing. So you can see kind of with research, it goes along like this. You have a thread that kind of ties it all together, but by asking and answering one question, it leads you to others, which can create a really exciting and rich, lifestyle, occupation, vocation that I truly am fortunate for and deeply enjoy. So you can see that I put up some sample articles where you can see that thread going from, that initial sharing economy piece to the behavioral stuff and the dark patterns piece. But again, we appreciate your time and we look forward to taking your questions later in the evening.
Thanks a lot, Abby. It's really interesting work that I'm sure that many of our students who are on the webinar recognize the importance of the issues. Next, I want to turn it over to Noah Stoffman, who's an associate professor in finance and also the faculty chair of the Kelley School's doctoral program. Noah.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, I think it's great that there's so much interest among our undergraduates for the research that's happening at Kelley. And I think it's really good to see the sort of some of the variation or the differences of or the span, I guess, of the research that that happens at Kelley. You're seeing just 3 departments. I think we've got 7 different departments at Kelley. But so you've seen sort of Christiano's research related to like leadership, sort of like people within organizations. You've seen Abbey's research more about sort of like the legal regulatory environment that firms have to act in. In finance, we're interested in, or sort of financial economics, we're interested a lot in sort of financial aspects, both for companies and also for people, right? So, you know, I like to think of, well, I'm not the one who thought of this, but I think a useful framework for thinking about the financial markets is sort of like a giant time machine that allows people to move money into the future for, you know, when they get old and they're not working and they need to, you know, still have a house and food and stuff. So they take their money from today and they put it in a time machine and they get it later. And then companies and innovators use that time machine to take their profits from the future and bring it to the present so they can make stuff. And that whole mechanism of how that works is sort of what finance is about. I think finance is basically about a time machine. And there's just a huge range of subjects that kind of fall within that. And I really liked how Abbey was talking about the idea of a thread. You sort of start to pull on that thread. So when I was in graduate school, my dissertation, the sort of main thing that I did research on, was decisions that individual investors make. And the research that I do, for the most part, is empirical research, meaning that I take data and I use statistical analyses to kind of understand some phenomenon by looking in the data and seeing what the data can teach us about how, for example, people make decisions. So my dissertation, I was studying behavior of individual investors, regular people. And in order to kind of effectively do research like that, you need really good data. And unfortunately, actually, we don't have great data like this in the US, but in the Northern European countries, the government, for various reasons, that the governments have incredible amount of information about their people, and they are willing to share this information with researchers. So when I was a graduate student, I got access to a database of about, I don't know, 5.5 million people in Finland, basically the entire population of Finland and all of the trades that they made in their personal accounts. And so my research it started off being about how individual investors make investment decisions, and in particular, do they learn from their behavior, their experience? Do they get better over time? Do they learn to be better traders? And you can see down toward the bottom of the slide, it says learning by trading. So that was one of my published papers that I wrote quite a while ago now, that was sort of asking this question about individual investors. And then just as Abbey was talking about sort of pulling on the thread, from there, I started to think more about other kinds of decisions that individual investors make, how they are affected by the social networks that they're in. And that really has become sort of a major theme of my research. A lot of my research relates to social networks and how information is transmitted, financial information is transmitted through social networks. And so I have a number of papers that sort of look at that. And really just sort of that kind of all started with my dissertation, leading from one paper to another, exactly in that sort of pattern that Abbey was talking about. Another area of my research that's really like totally different is about technological innovation and asset prices. And so that's sort of thinking about how technological innovation that happens in firms, how that sort of affects risk characteristics of firms, and ultimately how it affects the way that asset prices move through time, the way that why do some companies earn higher returns than other companies, and what are the sort of risks associated with that? Really fundamental question, but thinking about it from the perspective of technological innovation. And all of my research, almost all of my research, not learning by trading actually, but well, actually, no, sorry, learning by training. Well, what I was saying was all of my research is, for the most part, is work that I've done with other people. I think, well, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about this, but I think one of the things that's really great about research, at least in finance, is that for the most part, we work with other people. So I think in my entire career, I've published one paper that I wrote all by myself. And the rest of this research is research that I have done with colleagues at Kelley, with colleagues at other universities. So it's a collaborative effort. I did just want to, I wanted to give a few examples of some of the papers that I've written about, or some of the things that I've written about. So Ben, if we could just jump to the next page. So on the left-hand side, and I didn't want to scare anybody, but I just want to give, like, this is an example on the left of sort of like what some research in finance looks like. So this is actually more of a theoretical paper. Jamie mentioned at the beginning how some faculty in the business school use theory models to sort of make predictions or understand how things might work. And so this was sort of just sort of an example of like what a model like that might look like. It's got a whole bunch of variables. There's a bunch of math, but the point of a model like this is to kind of be able to say, well, I think the world works like this. I think this is sort of a reasonable simplification of the kinds of decisions that people might make. And then what can we learn? What can we sort of derive from that? What sort of conclusions can we draw by doing some math and solving our model in different ways? And then often we'll take that model or the predictions of that model to some data, and we will look at some data. So on the left here, that model is a model that relates to innovation and how if you have an innovator, someone who sort of has come up with a new technology, and then how that technology is going to affect a firm's decision and how it affects other investors, and from that we can draw conclusions. So that's one type of research. On the right, this was just sort of a quick way to kind of summarize another paper of mine, which is a completely different kind of paper. There's no, or very, very little theory involved. This is an empirical paper where we got a bunch of data and then tried to say something sort of important about how financial markets work. So actually what you're seeing on the right here, this is obviously a map of the US. And this is some work that I did a few years ago related to the Madoff Ponzi scheme. You may have heard of Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff, of course, was the perpetrator of the largest Ponzi scheme in US history. And what we were interested in looking at in this paper is not so much the fraud itself, but the sort of knock-on effects, the effects of that fraud on other people. And so in particular, we were sort of interested in what happens within social networks, or how if somebody's trust in financial markets is negatively affected, does that sort of spread through social networks to affect other people's trust in financial markets? And so what this map is actually just a map of is where the victims of the Madoff Ponzi scheme live. And so the red, this sort of different red coloring, the lighter colors means really not a lot of victims are there. The white color means there were no victims there. And then the darker color is where there's lots of victims. And basically what you see is that there's a lot of victims in New York City and a lot of victims around Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And then the blue circles is where people are searching, Google searches for the word Madoff. And there's no conclusions that you can draw from this picture, but this picture is part of a much bigger story that we tell, where we look at where people live who were affected by Madoff, and then we look at characteristics in that area to see, well, what happened? Did bank deposits go up or down? Did people's allocation to risky assets, so did people's investments with investment advisors go up and down if they're more likely to have social connections to people who lost money with the Madoff scheme? And we actually find really strong evidence that yes, actually, if you are socially connected to somebody who lost money in the Madoff Ponzi scheme, that's really going to affect your personal investment decisions. And so this is an example of using data. And one of the things that financial economists are really sort of obsessed with is trying to identify causality. Christiano talked about a really interesting experiment where they got people into the lab and they, or they had them waking up at night and they were doing a survey. It's really, really hard to do experiments in finance. It's almost not done at all. So what we use instead are econometric methods where we try to be kind of clever. We try to sort of figure out ways to get the data to tell us something about causality. And I think that's actually a really interesting and exciting thing that we do in a lot of business school disciplines, is sort of this sort of like looking at causality in a way that frankly, even 20 years ago wasn't really so well understood. Next slide, please, Ben. So let me just tell you quickly about one other paper, and you'll see I've got another map. I like to put maps in my papers. So this is another paper looking at social networks. And the idea here is, well, again, like Abbey was talking about pulling that thread, I sort of moved away from individual investors and I went, started working on professional investors, mutual fund managers. And so this is a paper where we were asking basically the question, if two mutual fund managers know each other, all right, are they more likely to have similar trades and similar portfolios? And that's kind of an interesting question to think about. Well, how would I prove that? How do I know they know each other? How do I know if their trades are more similar? And so we collected lots of data about where mutual fund managers lived. We identified their neighbors. And so we basically looked for cases where two mutual fund managers lived really, really close together. Now, obviously, we don't know for sure if they know each other, but we can say, look, these two people live next door to each other, or they live down the street from each other. And then we can say, well, let's compare their trading behavior and their mutual funds that they manage to similar mutual funds that are managed by people who aren't neighbors. And what we see is that when you look at mutual fund managers who are neighbors or who live near each other, their trades and their portfolios are much more highly correlated than you would expect them to be just for two mutual funds that are otherwise similar. So there does seem to be something really kind of special about neighbors. And then we actually are able to look and say, well, are those trades that they make more valuable? And in fact, what we find is that when neighbors trade something at around the same time, that trade tends to be more profitable, suggesting that they're actually sharing value relevant information with each other. And so this is another example. I have 3 or 4 papers that sort of look from different angles, trying to understand how does valuable information move through the economy? How is it transmitted through the economy through social interactions? So just a little bit of an example. Hopefully, if you're interested in finance research, please have a look at my website. I've got all links to papers on there, or any of the faculty in finance. If you look at, we all have websites. We all put our research on there. We love for students to have a look at it, get excited about it, contact us, ask questions, that sort of thing. So thanks very much for joining, and looking forward to your questions.
So thank you so much, Noah. And I want to remind all of the attendees that if you have questions for our panelists, either to specific panelists or for generally for them, please do enter them in the Q&A. I'm going to invite the panelists to join back on the video, and we'll have a bit of a discussion among us. And I first want to throw a question to Professor Guarana, because this question, I think we have a lot of faculty members who come to their academic careers from really interesting backgrounds, but Christiano, you may have the most interesting background prior to your academic career. I think I'm accurate in saying that you came to be a faculty member through the basketball court and the clubs where bands play, right? You were a professional basketball player and a drummer in a band, is that right?
Oh my gosh, news is spread very fast. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you decide to move from shooting baskets and playing drums to being a professor and doing research?
Oh, my basketball career was terminated by the force of nature. So I got injured and it twisted my knee. And at that time, I didn't really have an option to play at high level. So then at that time, it's interesting because my dad had a insurance brokerage company in Brazil, and I started working with him. And I was always curious, and I think this is something that I see very often among professors. Okay, we tended to be more curious than judgmental. Okay, we want to ask questions, and perhaps we can provide answers. But then during that time, I started doing some consulting for mid-sized companies, small companies as well. Again, because I was curious, I wanted to learn more. I was building knowledge about businesses, helping many companies to develop strategies and implement strategies. We adopted the balance scorecard terminology. Some of you may be familiar with that. But then I started noticing that developing the strategy, creating the metrics, it was relatively easy. We just get a bunch of people in a room, usually the top management team of the mid-sized companies. We came up with strategies, vision, mission, and all of that. The main issues happened when we were trying to implement the strategy. And the main issues were related to people resisting the change or not buying the new initiatives. So I started thinking, well, who is to blame here? What is the dynamic that's being played? And at that time, I was very naive. I said, well, probably this is the leader's job. Okay, so the leader has to inspire. The leader has to come up with ideas. And at that time, I was really working extremely long hours, and I was extremely burnt out. I went back home once, and I told my wife that we needed to really rethink our lives. And we went to this resort, and we spent 5 days thinking about our personal values, what were really important. And education was a huge part of who I am. And then we actually wrote a mission for my life, which is impact the lives of others via education. Through that vision, I worked backwards and said, well, to have the most impact, I needed to do a PhD. Where can I find the best PhD possible? I am Brazilian. Probably you know that I'm not American based on my accent. I'm from Brazil, a small town in Brazil. So I decided to sell everything that I had in Brazil and move to America with my crazy wife that said yes. We found a program that focused on leadership, and that was at the University of Washington in Seattle. Got my training there, and I've been doing research on leadership since. I have no regrets, and I completely agree with Abbey. This thread, it's such a nice analogy because you keep building. Okay? And the important part to me really is that you answer one question, but by answering that question, there are so many others that it's a never-ending process. And as Noah said, you can choose the collaborators. Okay, you can choose the people that you work with. It's not that you are putting a team and go do stuff. No, you have this flexibility. So to me, the curiosity with the flexibility of choosing people that you want to work with. And in general, people are not judgmental. They are open to new ideas. And they're all hard worker and smart people. So this is really, to me, the perfect career, the place that I wanted to be. So coming from a basketball player that had my injury, finishing my career, I'm considering myself very lucky. I really found my place, I would say my calling. And yeah, probably the trajectories of others are very different. But if you're curious, if you wanted to work with people who are smart and hard worker, academia is definitely an option for you.
Well, thanks, Christiano. I want to throw the question to Abbey just to expound on a little more, because Abbey's Professor Stemler's background is also interesting in the sense that out of the three of you, Professor Stemler is the only one who didn't go through a PhD program, because legal scholars don't always go through PhD programs. Law school is considered a terminal degree. So Abbey, given that you went to law school, there's lots of opportunities. You sort of said you didn't love the practice of law, but there were other opportunities available to you. What drove you toward an academic career, particularly as a tenure track faculty member? Because I think also you may be the only member of the panel who started your academic career not as a tenure track faculty member and moved into that.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so interesting to learn about my colleagues here. Did not know the basketball thing at all. So yeah, having taken kind of a non-traditional route in terms of what the average background of a tenure track faculty member looks like. And to give you a little bit of context, because I didn't know this, at the university, we have various levels of people that you engage with. Your clinical faculty, people we call clinicians, they are probably those that have had a lot of experience in their particular industry that teach you, whatever topic is. And then we have other people that are full-time teachers. So they come in with a lot of specialized knowledge, often a lot of experience, and they're classified as lecturers. So we got lecturers, clinicians, and then all of the researchers we classify as tenure track. Some of them are pre-tenure. They haven't reached the hurdle of proving that their scholarship is, really making an impact. Therefore, they get to stay if they get tenure. And then people that have tenure, right? So tenure is kind of a relic in terms of a concept in today's age where it provides a lot of job security. So when we're talking about becoming a tenure track faculty, we're talking about becoming a research faculty member. So as we saw with the thread and kind of how scholarship grows, for my career, my path, it's been very much a thread-based process as well. Sometimes people experience their career development as a system of trial and error. Mine kind of just became a series of micro goals. So like I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm a first generation college student. So going to college was a big accomplishment. Even though it was only an hour and a half away from New Albany, Indiana, it was still, I was the first to go. So we had that goal, getting into college. Then it was get the good grades in college and, pick a major you like. I picked a major I loved, anthropology, but I didn't really like careers. So, my next goal when I was my junior, senior year is all right, figure out how to get into grad school. Then from grad school, I had no idea that I wanted to be a lawyer, but that was the program I chose. Then it was to get good grades in grad school so you can get a job. All of these micro goals along the way. So I went, did well in grad school, got a great job coming out, hated the great job just in terms of the style of a law firm is very rigid, the workload is massive, and you have to track every 6 minutes of your time because that's how you bill your client who, that just felt icky. And I spent most of my time getting racinos, off-bet racing, so off track, places where you would bet on horse races, getting them out of taxes. So it wasn't the best feeling type of work. And so knowing that was not where I wanted to be, I had to think deeply about how do I get out of here? So I spent, between my 6 minute increments looking at other jobs, and just randomly the place I was an RA for in graduate school, the Business Law and Ethics Department, with actually Professor Jamie Prenkert as my the head of the research and also my former professor. Here was a job teaching as a lecturer in the business school, and I felt way underqualified, but I, talked to everybody I knew. I prepared my documents thoroughly. Of course, because I had worked really hard in school, fortune favors a prepared resume kind of thing. They gave me a chance when I was, very green. And then from there, I realized I love teaching, but what I really had undiscovered passion for was to answer these questions that I kept seeing, right? So in parallel with my job as a lecturer, I was also building this hotel, right? So I was like, this is really what I want. And so I made that my goal with all my heart. And after several tries, I got my dream job. And then after 6-7 long years, I got tenure, so I get to stay, hopefully. I guess I could run over somebody's toe or something in the Kelley parking garage and lose it all. But fortunately, that kind of series of micro goals has allowed me to end up in a place I never thought I would, but ultimately it's a place I cannot imagine not being.
Well, great. And I think embedded in that story from Professor Stemler is that you can overcome even the greatest obstacles of having difficult instructors and bad mentors, right? So
terrible mentors. No, I always joke to my students, so though, be nice to everybody, because you never know the professor you had at 19 is going to be your boss 20 years later.
Well, I want to know, and Professor Stemler, I should say, and this is encouragement for all those on here, was a fantastic student, and you could see the sort of curiosity and clarity of thinking, even as a student in an undergraduate class that turns into a fantastic researcher. And maybe thinking in that direction, Noah, sort of reflecting on what led you into your academic career, but also how that might be translated into advice you have for students who might be considering whether research is something they're interested in. I wonder if you could talk a little about that.
Yeah, I thought it's something I've actually thought about a fair bit, or tried to anyway. I think, research is it's hard. It's a lot like entrepreneurship. You are sort of your own boss. You have to market yourself. You have to convince people to buy your product. You have to convince people that the research that you're doing is important or interesting. It can be kind of lonely. I mean, in some fields, you might be more likely to work alone, or you might be, working, collaborating, but there's still a lot of kind of working. And it's one of these jobs where you have to, like, nobody really cares what the input is. What people care about is the output. And what's great about a job like that is that your input might not have to be very high. But what's bad about a job like that is that your input might have to be really high. And it's kind of hard to turn a job like that off. Like I was actually just the other day talking to my wife about, maybe I should have been an electrician. Like, there seems to be really, like, being an electrician actually seems really cool. They get paid a pretty good amount of money, and at the end of the day, they can say, like, I turned on the electricity in that person's house. And then I imagine, but I don't know for sure, that electricians don't lie in bed at night, worrying about, I don't know, did they set up the circuit breaker properly? But I think that, doing research is that kind of job. It's sort of all encompassing. It kind of, and so because of that, it's something you have to be passionate about. I think it is impossible to be someone who kind of, that's your full-time career, is doing research, is if it's not really something you care about, or if you're sort of you have to be driven, sort of what's the word, internally motivated, self-motivated to kind of want to keep doing that, because it's a very strange business. I mean, you don't, as a professor, in some way. I mean, Jamie is the executive associate dean, and you might think in some way he's my boss, but I mean, the truth is he's not, and I can do whatever I want, and I don't have to listen to him most of the time. And that's a weird thing about academia, and it can be great, but it also, it has its downsides. And I think because of that, I think it really has to be something that you're sort of passionate about and you want to do. Now, how do you know if you're passionate about it? I mean, to be honest, my experience was very different from both of the other panelists. I as an undergraduate, I loved learning. I just loved being an undergrad, and I just kind of always knew that I wanted to do research. And I don't know why, I don't know how I knew that, but I just kind of, that was just what I wanted to do. And so after I graduated from undergrad, I went and I worked for a couple of years. I grew up in Canada. I worked in New York, in Toronto for a year, and then I worked in New York City for a couple of years, sort of in the financial industry. But the whole time I was there, my plan was to go and get my PhD and become a professor. So I just sort of had this clear path. And I think, if you're here and you're kind of, I mean, maybe you're here because you're interested in maybe doing research. Maybe you're just here because you're interested in hearing about what research happens. I do think one of the really interesting things about undergrad, or from the perspective of undergrads, is you think of your professors as teachers, which makes a lot of sense because that's what they do with you. But many faculty, Abbey sort of laid out the different kind of gradations or groups of faculty. Like, for many faculty, teaching is a small part of their job. And so, to become a professor is, in business schools is, for the most part, is a job that is going to be a job about doing research and then teaching sometimes. And there's all kind of spillovers, and, as Jamie was talking about, how research informs your teaching and this sort of thing. But I think that, so getting any kind of experience, any kind of practice, any kind of, exposure as a research assistant, anything like that, to kind of have a bit of an idea of what research is actually about, can sort of give you, some idea of whether or not you think that that's something that you're passionate about and you would want to follow.
Great. I want to give Christiano and Abbey both an opportunity to sort of talk about, if you're thinking back to yourself as an undergrad, what things did you do that really prepared you to be a good researcher? What things would you do now if you could go back and say, Christiano, the undergrad, Abbey, the undergrad, you should be doing this because it will prepare you even better to embark on a research career?
If I start going down the rabbit hole of what I would have wished I had done, then it gets really scary. So I'll just focus on what I think was most helpful. And that is, first and foremost, and this always seems hard because it's like, how did that happen? It was find a great mentor or mentors. I know it's sort of like networking. You're saying, right, but how do I network? Like, how do I make connections? I will say it happens when you just put good energy forth and be curious yourself about other people. So if you find, one of your professor's research or background interesting, go meet him in office hours. And then over time, if you share your enthusiasm, they will probably like you in return. And everybody likes to talk about themselves, right? And so once you make that connection, then staying in touch with those people in your life who you're curious about yourself, they can help you along the way because they've got, can kind of see the future a bit because they've been there. And so I was very fortunate to find good mentors. I also found some bad ones that you have to shed, right? But at the same time, I think that was always the most mysterious thing in terms of people would tell me, find a good mentor. And then I look back and like, oh no, I had some. It was just like the people I connected with. So stay in touch, listen, and the connections will be easier than you think. And then the second quick piece that I think has really helped me surprisingly much is, and Jamie's going to laugh, listen to podcasts. I get some of my most brilliant shower moments because of a podcast, because, I have for a couple, maybe too many hours a day, some smart people sharing ideas in my ears, and it just stimulates me in a way that I really feel it's almost like a shortcut. Like back in the day, you'd have to sift through hundreds of books to find a couple of nuggets of idea that you really latched onto. With the opportunity of some wonderfully curated podcasts, you can get smart ideas and interesting facts and studies. I'm thinking about like Hidden Brain or Planet Money, Invisibilia or Through Lines. There's some podcasts I can share with you later, but those are great ways to kind of just feed your brain some candy and pique your curiosity. So mentors and podcasts.
I would like to echo what Abby just mentioned, okay, because it is networking is so important. I before becoming an academic, I as I mentioned, I was a consultant, and I also taught as a lecturer in some universities in Brazil, and I kept those connections. It's interesting. All that it needs from me is an email at the end of the year saying happy holidays. Okay, you don't need. It's not a super effortful task, but those people will remember you later. And I use that network to collect data now, okay, 20, 30 years after, okay? So build and nurture your network. And I couldn't agree more with this idea of finding mentors, right? So the network is a bunch of connections, but you needed to find 1, 2, 3 people that will really be instrumental in your life. Yeah, my mentor, my PhD mentor, the chair of my dissertation, she's my friend now. She's beyond being a mentor, right? So find those 1, 2, 3 people, and yeah, it's so important. And one quick comment about intrinsic motivation. We in academia, let's say that we are a bit smart, right? So we are at least curious. What makes us, what makes one person succeed above and beyond is really the effort, right? It's your determination. Because let's say that IQ is constant across us. Okay, I'm not the smartest person in the world by far, but I put a lot of effort. So find good networks, work hard, show that you can do it before believing that you can do it, and find good mentors. Those are probably the 3 things that I would encourage you. If I could give you pieces of advice, those would be it. Yeah.
So Noah, following up on that, you mentioned how you kind of had that early knowledge that you were interested in, you love to learn, you were interested in doing research all along. If there's somebody on this webinar right now who says that resonates with me, what should they do as an undergrad to explore that, to find out whether it is a passion, to determine, is this something that I can really develop that intrinsic motivation to do?
So I think they should try to get some kind of experience as a research assistant, some kind of to work with a faculty person. And I think most faculty are, approachable. And I think that, it depends a little bit on the topic that they're interested in or the area of research. I think some departments, it's easier for a faculty person to bring in an undergraduate to help with their research. I think some kinds of research require a lot of training before you can be sort of useful to the research endeavor, and in those areas getting that kind of research experience can be harder. But I think certainly I would say to contact a faculty person. And how do you know who to contact? Well, I would say have a look at their website, see the kind of research that they're interested in. It's a lot easier to find this out now than it was when I was trying to do this 25 years ago. And so, have a look at their website, see if there's something that interests you. And if there is, just shoot them an email and say, hey, I was interested in this paper that you wrote. Could we meet? Do you have an opportunity to can I do something, with you? The other thing that you could do also, and actually, to be honest, I don't know exactly what the opportunity for this is at the Kelley School, but I'm sure somebody can answer, is, if there's an opportunity to do some sort of independent study. I think the kind of like an independent study with a faculty person. I actually did that as an undergraduate with a woman who I am still in touch with all these years later. And that was very sort of eye-opening to me about like, it was sort of a bit of a deep dive into like, I was reading papers, reading research and trying to kind of write and like what my understanding of that research was about. And there's also, I think the opportunity, this might sound kind of crazy. And again, it depends a little bit on the field and what you're interested in, but like there are journals, academic journals that are actually targeted to sort of a more general audience. So just the example of one I know is there's a journal called the Journal of Economic Perspectives, which is basically economics and related disciplines. But it is written there, it's sort of research, it kind of summarizes research. So it's kind of researchy, but it's not kind of like a smart, enthusiastic undergrad could easily read articles in that journal and get a bit of an idea of like what research is about. And I'm sure that there are journals like that in other fields as well. And that, when I was an undergrad, like that's the kind of thing I used to do, is go to a library and read the Journal of Economic Perspectives, which is why I say I think I knew pretty early on that that's what I was interested in. But there are, and all of this stuff, you can find it online and these days. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to try to kind of dip your toe a little bit and sort of see, well, what is research? What is it that these people are doing? And I think any of those would be, great things to try.
Yeah, let me jump in on what Professor Stoffman was saying. I too did some research as part of like an independent study. It was a requirement for my psychology major, but I worked in an infant eye tracking lab to kind of watch infants track things on a screen to see how they learn. That was my first foray into what scholars do, researchers do. And it was, even though nothing related to what I do now as an academic, it was really, really useful and helpful to kind of see that process of inquiry from hypothesis to data collection to ultimately some sort of insight. And then second, I would say, look for the resources available to you on campus and specifically at Kelley. If you, for example, are in the Hutton Honors College, they have grants available to students who want to complete research, which, researching is a privilege. If you don't have to work or you have the free time to do it, that's great. But if for some reason it was between a summer job and getting your feet wet into research, there are resources available to you so you can do both. So I encourage you to look at the Honors College website, and I encourage you also to, I'm sure, go to the undergraduate chair and talk to them about networking with some professors that you might want to work with.
And I want to just sort of point out too that as Professor Stoffman said, and Professor Stemler has suggested, it may feel like I don't want to reach out to that professor because what specialization do I have? What could I add? But really, as Professor Stoffman said, there are some areas of research where you probably have to have lots and lots of training in order to really qualitatively add to it, but lots that you can be very sort of alongside, do some work that's going to help the researcher learn a whole bunch about how the research works without having much training. For instance, I know, Abby, you've worked with lots of undergrads who've never, maybe L201 is the only law they've ever really been exposed to. So I don't know, Christiano, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, a quick comment. Be proactive. So I think being proactive is so important, and be humble. Okay, so don't approach a professor projecting that you think you know everything. Okay, we don't know everything. We are here because we want to learn more, not because we know everything. So be proactive and be open. Okay, even though you may like one area, okay, who knows? Okay, you don't know everything. You'll be exposed to other areas. You'll be exposed to a process, okay, our research process almost, and you'll be reading broadly. So it's interesting. The first 2 years of your PhD program, okay, you will be taking seminars in many different areas, and you'll read very broadly. So it's actually good that you go to a PhD program with an open mind and explore. And then eventually you'll find something that is your passion. But the common thing across all the really successful PhD students that I've been in touch with, curiosity and hard work. Okay, so those two traits, you have to nail those. And again, as an undergrad, be proactive. Look for professors. Show that you are there to learn from the experience. Don't be overconfident. Okay, it's okay to be overcompetent, but never overconfident.
So I want to remind our attendees that you can type any question you have for the panelists into the Q&A. Ben, while we're giving the attendees that opportunity, maybe we could bring up that slide and we could give Professor Stoffman opportunity to say a little bit about the PhD program at Kelley.
Yeah, so thanks, Jamie. So like many business schools, not all, but many prominent business schools, the Kelley School has a PhD program. We have currently 71 doctoral students across most of the departments. If you are at all interested in thinking about a PhD, even if you're not thinking about a PhD at Kelley, we would be happy to talk to you. I say we because I am the chair of the doctoral program at Kelley, in addition to being a finance professor. But so you know, I do think that there's a lack of information about PhD programs, and this is something that I would really like to reduce the lack of information about, and that is, well, there are a couple things. So first of all, I mean, as it says here, you know, why would you want to do a PhD? Well, so that you could become a business school professor or do research in sort of business disciplines in government or think tanks or private companies. Business school professors earn highly competitive salaries. You know, if you don't know what we make, you can look it up. It's public knowledge. Our salaries for business school professors at public universities around the US are public. You can just Google it and you will see what business school professors make. And there's all kinds of interesting economic reasons why business school professors are paid pretty well. But it's something that I think, you know, that ought to be part of your consideration for, do you want to go into a different field? I don't think anybody becomes a professor just to make money, but it's, you know, if you're passionate about research, it's not a bad thing also. But where I think there really is a lack of information is that PhD students do not have to pay tuition and actually get paid. Now, you don't get paid super well as a PhD student. I'm sure you can go make more money doing something else. But if you are a PhD student at the Kelley School or in any business school, they will pay you. We will pay you to be a PhD student, and you do not pay tuition. It is free education, care of the undergraduate students and the taxpayers of the state of Indiana. So that is certainly something to you know, to be aware of. We offer PhD degrees in all of the different disciplines that you see listed here. And if you are interested in thinking about. If you just, have some vague questions, some vague idea, maybe I might want to apply to a PhD program in a few years. Visit our website. You can learn more. Shoot us an email. I'm happy to meet with anyone and talk about, your interest in a PhD program.
Thanks. I think that's a really important part of this, is to really get that information out there. The opportunity often seems distant and unknown, and people, I think, have a tendency to think, oh, more school, you're going to drive yourself deeper into debt, and the PhD program is really not like other kinds of educational degrees in that way. And so I think it's great information to have out there.
And perhaps, and
yeah,
just
please.
one quick comment there. And usually we start getting applications in the fall, right? So, and decisions are made at the beginning of the year. So if you're considering a PhD, yeah, you still have some time to really do the research on what a PhD is and what are the documents required and the letters required for the application process, because in general, the deadlines are late fall and the decisions are made in January, February.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for that additional information. Really important. I think we're coming close to our close of time, so I want to give the panelists an opportunity to share anything else that they might want to get in as the last word. Particularly if you want to, we may have people, students in the out there as our observers, who may not be sure that they want to be researchers themselves, but and maybe skeptical about why should I even care about research? If you want to address that might be something worth leaving, that research can be vitally important even if that's not your chosen career.
Well, maybe I'll just jump in quickly and say, I think, Jamie, you mentioned the sort of practical application of researchers in ODT helping out the hospital with scheduling and stuff. I think COVID, the pandemic, with all the problems it's created, it has also provided, I think, really a great example of like why it's important to have some basic understanding of science. Why it's important to have, to be able to, as a kind of productive citizen of the world, to like be able to think about, what constitutes good research, what is a plausible conclusion of research, and of course, the same thing goes with climate change and many of the other sort of globally important issues that certainly undergraduates today are going to be dealing with forever. I think there's good research, there's bad research, there's it's important to be able to kind of understand or have some ability to kind of think through what what an appropriate action is, like how to kind of use evidence to make good decisions, I think is, and just to be like a citizen of the world. I think that's an important and useful step.
Yeah, and to add to that, on the grand scale, like the scientific method and the process of, making sure your conclusions are based on fact and, as close as we can get to it, I think that is 100% what, we can all take away from good scholarship. But on a more micro scale, if you don't think you want to become an academic, that's fine. So for a very small subset of people that like to just lock themselves in their office for endless stretches of time. But I will say, in the age of infoglut, like we have so much information out there at any given time. And so I will always say, that if you seek out scholarship directly from those doing the work at top universities like Kelley, chances are that because it's produced based on peer review and at leading institutions, it's more likely than not, even if you don't quite understand it all, to be good science and good research. So if you're curious about something and you're confused, I would say maybe stay away from the podcast, especially one Joe Rogan, for while you're as a part of your process. Go look up the literature, the academic research, because that will be as close as you possibly can get to some true and relevant insights. So use us as resources as you go into your career, because I certainly know some of the most impactful work that we do is when we actually get to connect with industry, governments, nonprofits, and share kind of the little piece of the world that we deeply study.
Yeah, and it's really rewarding to see when you can help people work better, right? I do research on sleep, and now we know that sleep is not only good for your health, but for leaders and for workers as well. And we have proposed a bunch of interventions to organizations that actually help employees sleep better. And it's not all the initiatives could be implemented to all companies. And now we also actually found that just wearing these blue light blocking glasses can help people sleep better and be more productive. And go back to the conversation about the pandemic, that we are all looking at the screen. So if you can wear these blue glasses for 2 hours, only 2 hours before going to bed, do so, okay? And that will improve your sleep. So that knowing that we can help people live better lives and do their jobs, perform their jobs better, this is really rewarding and something that I am really proud of contributing to society, right? So yeah, it's the small wins, they are all important.
Well, thank you, panelists. I want to thank Professor Stemler, Professor Guarana, and Professor Stoffman for your time, your insights, your inspiration. I also want to thank Professor Bree Josephy, who was the organizer and the conceiver of the Research Week. I want to thank Ben Taylor and Chloe Storm and their team in the undergraduate program for making sure we were all here, we were seen, we were heard, and we were well organized. And I want to again mention that tomorrow, same time, we have another panel with professors from accounting, marketing, and the operations side of operations and decision technologies. And encourage you to go see your fellow students on Friday when they're doing their research, they're reporting on their research that they've done as part of the honors thesis projects. Thank you again for your time. Thank you to the panelists. I hope you all have a really great night.
Get some sleep.
Great.